Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast. We believe you have been created in God's image. However, as in all of us, the likeness of Christ has been diminished and needs to be restored by the experiential love and truth of Jesus. My name is Steve Freitag. I'm a former pastor and have been a part of Cross Counsel for over 25 years, facilitating more than 10,000 ministry sessions. In this podcast, we aim to share helpful insights and inspiring testimonies to support you on your journey. You don't need to be a spiritual giant to receive ministry with us. Just a courageous heart, open and willing to God's refining fire. Those who dive into our melt process find immediate help and lasting hope. This is Changing Generations. We've heard from many of you who have been blessed by our podcast and ministry. If you find value in what we do, we invite you to visit our website at crosscounsel.com, and you can support us, including this podcast, with a special financial gift, or even more importantly, consider becoming a monthly supporter to sustain our ministry and keep these podcasts coming. Your support makes a lasting impact now and in generations to come, both here in the States and in many places all over the world. I really enjoyed this part of my conversation with AJ, and I hope you will too. We begin somewhat midstream, diving right into the idea that our goal isn't to make more people dependent on us at Cross Counsel or any other human resource for that matter. Instead, we want our facilitation to facilitate a deeper personal connection with Jesus, especially in those moments when those old negative records start playing in our minds. AJ and I explored how we, like the Israelites in the Old Testament, often cling to modern idols, though ours today are more quote-unquote sophisticated than theirs were. And then we venture where angels fear to tread, stepping more into the half-measure subject, tackling both the benefits and shortfalls of turning to public figures as a way to manage feelings of lack and insecurity. And we don't want people to be dependent on us either. We want people to
The purpose
grow.
is for people to be so transformed and renewed that they don't need this.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need the facilitator experience every single time anything ever happens to them, right? That they would be able to take the process with them, and that they would be able to have an ongoing relationship of renewal and transformation through Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That like the best case scenario is that you get so healed and so transformed and walk with Christ in a new way that you don't ever have to go see Steve again, right? I think that's fair, right?
Right. Yeah, I love it when people come for 4 or 5 times within 2 months, and then maybe I don't hear from them for 6 months, and they're like, oh, okay, something went beyond what I was able to kind of process myself, and so I see them for 1 or 2 more times, and then maybe I won't hear from them for another 6 months or a year, and then they're like, well, okay, something else came up in my life, and I've been doing this on my own, but this thing, I'm just stuck. And then I've had people come after 10 years and go, man, things have been so much better than I ever imagined they could be, but now I'm hung up on this thing. Okay, giddy up. Let's go at it.
Yeah. An exponential decrease, right?
Right.
That's great.
So yeah, just the idea that, fully engaging with the process, recognizing the emotional pain that's driven by the lies we believe, and really letting Jesus address those things. Can't remember. I think it was in person with somebody where this is real. I got goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, especially when it's somebody's first or second time. I'm like, look, I said, I've been doing this a long time. I'm never surprised, but I'm always amazed. I'm not surprised because that's who Jesus is.
Right.
But it's always awesome when it seems like somebody is actually truly connected with the creator of the universe, cleaning up some stuff that's needed to be confronted and dealt with for a really long time. So that's just within the context of people stepping into the process here. But when we talk about half measures, the thing that Dr. Ed Smith has shifted in talking about is he talks about solutions. He has all these different boxes, and we don't we don't really use his process exactly as he lays it out now. I think it's helpful for some people, and what we do might be a little bit more helpful, but it's still the same idea. But he talks about when you're ministering to somebody and they're in the solution box. And the solution, one of the things that can be in the solution box is the idea of anger or denial or dismissal or blame shifting or coming to these other conclusions. But at the end of the
As in
day,
those are solutions previously referred to.
solutions that we do all the time, but also within looking down at when you got to the edge of the cliff, where one of the ways we look away is just going, oh, I've already dealt with this. I've already
Okay.
this, or when they start to look, anger comes up. But we do that on a regular basis outside of the melt process. We're constantly looking for things to distract us from our pain. And it's so easy to beat up on the Israelites. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, receives the Ten Commandments, and he doesn't find things all hunky dory when he comes back.
No, no, he doesn't.
It doesn't take long for the Israelites to do what?
To set up a golden calf and begin to worship it and pretend that that was the thing that delivered them out of Egypt.
So,
Moses is gone for 5 minutes, roughly speaking. And these people who just saw the Red Sea parted and the destruction of the world's military power smashed. Well, you know what we should do?
right.
Uh,
But it's so easy to make fun of them, to look at that, and we're
yeah,
so disconnected to that. I've never made a golden idol, literally. The idols that
literally
we have are way more sophisticated. And so as we look to,
sophisticated. Air quotes for the podcast listeners,
yeah,
sophisticated.
and so we could probably have a whole series on father wounds and the things that people do consciously or more likely subconsciously to try to deal with those. And in this day and age, there are so many different avenues that people have, things that they can reach for, and they don't even know that they're doing it. Um, so I think about, gosh, I don't know how old I was when I would watch things like Sesame Street, The Electric Company, but there was also Mr. Rogers. Now I was more drawn to Mr. Rogers because I didn't want to watch soap operas when I was, 8 years old, because there were only 4 channels. But I would watch Mr. Rogers. I had no idea until I was much older how significant Mr. Rogers was to my generation.
Yeah.
Because even though my family wasn't very emotionally healthy, it was stable. There
Yes.
was there
Right.
might have been yelling, but even though it wasn't said, we were taken care of,
Mhm.
at least physically. Our needs were always met. There wasn't a time where we needed to pray that God would bring food to our table. We were a very middle class family. My dad was hardworking. They were smart with their money. We were not wealthy in any sense. To pay more than $10 for sneakers was that was an issue when I wanted
Sounds
$20
like a long
basket.
time ago,
Yeah, right. No way are we,
$10.
yeah, no way are we paying $20 for you to have basketball shoes like that.
What's wrong with the
Yikes.
$10 pair? Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, because everyone will think I'm a nerd as the leather
Hmm.
shoes were coming into style and I'm still wearing my canvas ones. Anyway, but back to Mr. Rogers, how significant a difference he made in people's lives. But that still doesn't mean that Mr. Rogers, who loved God, right? Talk
Hmm.
about a moral man, seemingly. There's doesn't seem to be any dirt on Mr. Rogers. He really viewed
We'd have
his,
probably found it by now, you'd think.
you'd
Yeah,
think, right?
yeah,
He really did use or viewed his TV show as a ministry.
yes.
And so kids in my generation that came from broken homes, Mr. Rogers had this special place in people's hearts. And they might even say, Mr. Rogers was so healing to me. He was so significant. And I would say the significance, fine, but it's a half measure. It's
Right.
better than not having anything to reach for. It's better than not having anything to grasp. It's better than just being completely lost and alone. And so it's not a criticism of Mr. Rogers.
Right. It's not inappropriate for it to be significant or incorrect or any of that, right? It's not an indictment on you as my father when I say things like Coach Hurdle was a father figure to me, right? Because he was upright and honest and had integrity and tried to instill moral values into me as a member of the swim team, and then eventually like captain of the swim team. And sports figures, like coaches can have those roles and be significant to you, and it doesn't detract from the things that have that preeminent role, right? It's okay. It's not like you shouldn't have reacted to the good nature of Mr. Hurdle. You already have a good dad. I do,
Mhm.
but it was significant. It was, that part's fine. It's the idea that it was my complete and total comfort and that I have an identity in it would
Right.
would be the part where I think we reach too far, and that isn't the way that it should be.
Right. So you can be grateful and thankful, but those kind of relationships don't do what the Holy Spirit can do. Is that okay to
Right.
say? I hope it is,
Yeah.
right? Paul says,
Yeah.
follow me as I follow Christ, because as he followed Christ, I think his desire was that that would foster a deeper relationship with Jesus for all of those who followed him. He would never put himself in the place of the Holy Spirit. He would never put himself in the place of Christ.
Right.
So role models, fantastic. I know Brett Favre was kind of cool, and you loved watching Brett Favre. He loved to play the game, and his enthusiasm was intoxicating.
Yeah. It's Barb is more complicated now, unfortunately, for
Yeah.
that specific example. But yeah, as
Hmm.
just the guy on TV in the end of his career,
Hmm.
yeah, he
Right.
was like that. Yeah.
So, are there any role models that, because Mr. Rogers wasn't really as much of a thing for you, what would be,
No,
mm,
there would have been reruns, right? Like I knew everybody
mhm,
knows who Mr. Rogers is, even younger
right,
kids. And
right,
I think as entertainment fractured beyond four channels, maybe what I have in mind didn't apply to all millennials or people of my age. But the thing that I've seen a reaction online of that made the half measures conversation relevant to this would be Steve from Blue's Clues.
mm,
Because you know, he wasn't Mr. Rogers, but he brought you along on an adventure, and then you helped him and he thanked you for your help today, and you were a big part of us finding the clues or whatever, right? It was a kids show, and there was nothing wrong with it in our house. I remember having a I remember having a polo with Bluey or uh Blue on it, and I think Alex had the other dog from the show, and we
oh,
just
a
loved it.
polo. Okay, yeah,
The
because for
polo, yeah,
people who
the
don't
blue and the
know,
green
yeah,
polos. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So for people
Um,
who don't know, Steve was the real person, and
yes.
then Blue was this cute dog that just, I don't know, how do you imitate how Blue would talk?
It's one of a great number of kids shows, at least this was a thing from my generation, where like, do you see the thing on screen? Where is it? And then a kid thinking that they're a participant in the show and that, you know, the sweet man on the TV can hear you like, it's there, it's in the kitchen. It's like Dora the Explorer,
Mm,
you know, do you see the thing that I need to get? Yeah, it's right there. Oh, it's there. There's a call and
okay,
response in the show that I think was probably pretty interesting for a little one.
right, because he
And that
talks to the
was
TV,
part of the
right?
game, right?
Yeah,
You were participating.
right. Super cool for a kid.
Right. And so the
I got half
reason,
of the stuff right, I think, as an adult. So
right, yeah, that's, you know, above average, right? Over 50%. That's what above average means. Um, anyway, the reason that I thought about it being relevant to the talk here today is that Steve, I don't know if that's the guy's actual name, but like Steve from Blue's Clues is on TikTok and he's like, hey, you know, you kids watch the show when you were younger. You're probably 35, 40. How's it going? And just the heart pour out of these kids. Well, they're not kids, but they're millennials, and so they're, you know, in their 30s or late 20s or early 40s.
mhm.
And like, oh, Steve, I wish I could go back to finding clues. My life is rough, and like just like spilling their guts. So
Mm,
like I got divorced. You know, my dad was verbally abusive. Your show was a comfort. It was nice to have a man talk to me and not yell at me.
mm.
Stuff like that. Like, oh man, that cute TV show carried way more weight in people's hearts than it ever should have. You know,
Wow, that's
like
exactly like
people
Mr.
were
Rogers.
hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, People are
Wow.
hurt.
So yeah, thankful for how that helps some kids, that there's a man that doesn't yell at them.
Sure.
It,
Maybe that's a little piece of truth that they get to hang on to, and that would be, boy, that'd be better than thinking that every single man is like my dad,
mhm.
in those people's lives, right?
Right,
Yeah, that's
right,
not nothing, but
right.
it's not enough.
That's yeah, exactly. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. It's not enough. Yeah. Do you know of any? Is there anything else that's cropped up recently that has caught your attention? Because I think you pay more attention to some of those current things online than I do.
Yeah, the the Tim Walls is my dad phenomenon
Hmm.
that I've seen online, and I promise I'm not going to get political, really. But the people saying that, Tim Walls is the dad that I wish I had. Um, I wish that Tim Walls had come to my basketball games because my dad never did. Um, Tim Walls is the dad that we wish we had but lost to the TV, right? And so, if anybody's listening to this, um, right, really, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the guy's policy, but because he's running for vice president, he's in the limelight, and so he gets put forward, and they're trying to make him look good because it's their job because he's a politician, and then there's this big embrace, like, oh my gosh, this person that I can put my hope in because he's running for office. He's intending to be someone really important to civil life outside of being the governor of Minnesota. So I'm going to put my hope in this guy who I look to as a half measure for the hole in my heart for where my father hurt me, that I'm going to trust and hope in him to be some part of the face of the nation, and that I'm going to look to him as a source of comfort. Like, oh, isn't it so great that this politician is part of my life because they're an elected official, and it gives me comfort that someone like that's in charge, you know?
Hmm. Wow. I didn't. Yeah. I don't understand that because I.
Right.
It's so interesting that people talk about politicians and how it's like I can't trust a politician, and yet somehow in this case somebody is whether but though it could be AI, but I just can't
Sure.
imagine.
Yeah, some of the online traffic, I'm sure, is left, right, center, right? Everybody's playing the
Hmm.
game
Hmm.
to appear well. And you could make fan accounts and just write some of that stuff up, right? But there's just really too much of it to just be part of the campaign's angle. I just
Yeah.
couldn't really believe that.
Yeah, I just don't know who you can trust on TV. I mean, it wasn't at the and I'm again I follow some current events, but the Golden Bachelor from what earlier this year, or has it been a year, where everybody was like, "Oh, what a great guy," and then you find out that he kind of lied to the
Oh no.
producers and wasn't exactly who he said he was, and
Oh no.
it's so easy
Oh no.
to put
That's
forth
too bad.
a character, yeah, and of course there's people that just
I think that's probably actually the only Bachelor stuff I've ever sat down for because it was so much it was so much more tame, you
oh
know,
really
because you don't have the raging horn. Yeah, I mean we don't watch that stuff
okay
really anymore, but well, yeah, because it's not all the 20 somethings,
hmm
fornicating, where like these older people are. It struck us as a little more tame, but man, that's too bad that that was also a false image.
right
Huh.
right.
Okay.
And we could probably stretch this conversation out to more podcasts, but I even think, yeah, it's good to have role models, and there were people that I looked up to in sports. But then when I gave my life to Christ, I remember in my room one day just taking all these cassettes that I had of secular music, and I just tore them all up.
Hmm.
And just because I speak in parentheses, another guy that was in our youth group was in that same mode, and we went to his house, and he had albums. He had, the what are
Like
they,
vinyls.
33 vinyls, right?
Yeah.
And he had some pretty bad stuff, and we threw these albums, these vinyls, on this fire that we made, and there was one that was obviously they had a satanic look to them. They had satanic words, and that one just sat there on the top of the fire and did not burn for the longest time.
Ooh.
It was really creepy. Some of them melted pretty quickly, but one, it just sat there in the fire.
Yeah, like the
Anyway,
one ring, putting that last piece of resistance up as it's sitting on top of the
yeah,
log. Like,
maybe.
if someone grabs me really soon.
Right. It was really wild. So
Yeah,
anyway, I just went through that period in my life where it's like secular music, I am done with it. And I just gravitated toward the up and coming Christian music in the 80s, because that's really in the 70s it started to get some traction, but in the 80s, especially Christian music. And so it was like, oh, did you get to see so and so or so and so or so and so? We even put these Christian artists up on this pinnacle, and yet
sure.
they fall
Would that
as
be
well.
was it Stryker? Was that be the 70s?
Well, the Striper was 80s.
Right, the band that Ted Cruz was in.
Oh my gosh. Or not.
You gotta look that up. You gotta Google that. They look the same. They
That's
do.
hilarious.
That's the okay, so that's the 80s. All right. Anyway.
Michael Sweet. Yeah. What
Yeah,
an awesome voice. But some of those bands or some of those solo artists, boy, they lived a double life too. It's like, okay,
sure.
again, back to the idea of half measures. Just because you listen to a band, just because you went to a concert, doesn't mean that you're getting things ordered correctly in your heart and in your mind. It doesn't transform you. It can be better. It was better for me to toss the secular music and put my mind toward lyrics that were much more biblically based. I don't regret that for 1 minute. I think that was really
Right.
helpful on one level, but still, at the end of the day, nothing changes us like the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, everybody's got to do a little time, at least in some area of your life, as the weaker brother. Like
Hmm.
Paul talking about meat sacrifice to idols or keeping of Jewish holidays for the non-Jewish converts and the Jewish converts in Romans and First Corinthians. Everybody's got to do a little time in some area as the one who can't touch thing that's not necessarily a sin, but in my heart it's a sin. It makes me remember my sin or it entices me to sin. Everybody's got to spend a little time keeping an arm's length from something. Doesn't mean you need to live there forever, but yeah.
Right, right. This is good. So we'll continue this conversation for those who are paying $1,000 a month to us. Oh yeah, we don't do that. So we're just going to end the conversation here and maybe pick it up later.
Yet.
Yet. Anyway, so thank y'all. We'll see you next
Never.
week.